That's how we roll.
We are alive. I was actually kind of almost sort of ready for it tonight.
It is part of his 2021 resolution, folks, to be less surprised at the beginning of every broadcast.
I'm getting better.
I don't know if you realize this, Doug. If you go back and you look at like our Facebook screen caps, because you're surprised at the very beginning, that's usually like the first image. So if you go through the video gallery, that's just a bunch of thumbnails of you going, which is fantastic.
It's how excited I am to be here tonight.
Actually, considering these are all 2020 shows, that probably is the appropriate reaction to have.
That or just this.
Folks, welcome to the Two Bros Wrestling Show, and apologies for not being around last week as originally scheduled. Doug was not medically cleared to talk wrestling. So.
I was not medically cleared to talk wrestling. Absolutely not.
But we couldn't, in any imaginable sense, do a topic. Main event topic on AEW without Dynamite Doug in attendance. So thanks for the patience. And that is our main event tonight. We're going to talk a little bit here about Impact Wrestling and their alliance with the AEW and possible dream matches. Doug, you should have some big plans for this, I would think.
I have some big plans. I got to be honest, I am not that familiar with the current Impact product, but I did some homework. Actually, I had to crack. I've got my laptop open here, and I've done some homework to get more familiar with the Impact roster as of late. So.
Well, fantastic. Well, I'm glad you are better, and we thank everyone for joining us. We'll talk AEW Impact in our main event, but Doug, first, ding, ding, ding.
The opening bell.
Time for the opening bell. Actually, this is the first opening bell of 2021 since our only other broadcast this year was our special awards show. So we're back into a little bit of a more normal format for us tonight, and I'm excited about it. But busy couple of weeks thus far in 2021 in the wrestling world, so let's get right to it. This weekend, Doug, I'm sure you heard, and hopefully some folks out there heard as well, but WWE has announced some big WrestleMania-related news. This year's WrestleMania has been pushed back from the original late March to mid-April, and from LA, from where it was originally, supposed to be the host city for this year, to Tampa's Raymond James Stadium, which, as most of you probably know, is the location that WrestleMania should have took place in last year had the coronavirus not intervened with a very last-minute change in venue. So as part of the plans, it's going to be 2 nights once again. And then they also went ahead, Doug, and announced that next year will be in Texas, and then in 2023 in LA, where it should have been this year. And both of those are one-night events, at least the way they have them scheduled now, which leaves the question, and I don't know if you've heard anything or not, but I've not seen anything that has indicated whether or not they're going to have fans this year at WrestleMania. But I would think that the idea of trying to have it at the stadium for 2 nights might be a way to try to maximize some profit by having some limited available seating there at Raymond James Stadium for WrestleMania this year.
Yeah, because that stadium will hold, what, 70, 80,000 people? So.
Yes. And as we know, Florida is a little more lax, obviously, than some of the other states. That's why all of the wrestling that you're viewing on TV now is emanating from the state of Florida. And AEW has shown with their outdoor venue, essentially being a part of a football stadium, that there is a way to meet local obligations and governmental obligations and still have some semblance of a crowd in attendance. So stay tuned. When we find out a little more as to whether or not they will have plans for fans, we will let you know. But speaking of, Doug, plans for fans, since we last had a news segment, Wrestle Kingdom took place. And for those who are just American wrestling fans, you're really missing out, because Wrestle Kingdom, next to WrestleMania, is probably the biggest wrestling show of the entire year on this planet. As the Japanese scene, they fill the Tokyo Dome every year in January, and it's really important to note this particular Wrestle Kingdom because there were fans in attendance, and this may be portend for what might be down the road for a WrestleMania type event. It was the largest crowd to see professional wrestling in the world since last year's Wrestle Kingdom, primarily because of the coronavirus wreaking havoc on live touring and things. But it almost didn't happen because of Japan overall has been doing a whole lot better than America has when it comes to the spread of the virus. However, because of holiday gatherings, Christmas and New Year's gatherings, there was a last minute, can we even have this show type scramble because of the huge spike that Japan started to see. They did go ahead with the show. There were 15,000 fans in attendance for night one, less than that for night two. And again, this is in a stadium, as I think, you mentioned before, Doug, I think Tokyo Dome, something like 80,000 people. But I don't know if you heard about any of the rules. Obviously, one of the reasons that the country of Japan's done better overall than America is their adherence to guidelines and rules. But the crowd was not allowed to make audible noises. That was actually said during the broadcast. And guess what, Doug? If you know what would happen if we tried to tell an American wrestling audience that, okay, you can come in, but you can't make any audible noise. You know about how well that would go over? Exactly.
Yeah.
But over there, they sat quietly and they stomped and they clapped. But in between, there was some odd silences. But they mostly adhered to those rules and regulations. And so it made for an interesting broadcast. But it was interesting, too, to see fans in attendance. Even though it holds 80,000, 15,000 is a large gathering these days.
It's a frighteningly large crowd, in the middle of it's still in the middle of a global pandemic, but.
And the way they had it too, it didn't look much like Daly's place where they're kind of scattered about. It was the upper reaches of the stadium were empty, and it looked like all these 15,000 people were more on the floor with the wrestlers. So if you didn't know any better, it looked normal until you got the wide shot. So I'm with you. It kind of looked a little scary, just because of how we've been trained now to not see those folks in attendance. Moving on. New Japan related, though, New Japan Pro Wrestling is supposedly close to a TV deal that could be announced really any day now. New Japan had a U.S. TV show there for quite a few years with Access TV until that network was purchased by the company that also owned Impact. So you know how that worked out for New Japan. They do have an American dojo. They do an American TV show, New Japan World Strong, and apparently that show is close to landing on a network here in the United States. So we will keep you updated on that. Some comings and goings. Marty Scurll has parted ways with Ring of Honor. He's been off TV since he was mentioned in the allegations associated with the 2020 Speaking Out movement. He'd come to ROH in 2016 and right before the pandemic had re-upped a pretty big contract rather than leave for AEW with most of his friends. And part of keeping him at Ring of Honor was adding him to the booking committee. But almost immediately, again, everything got shut down because of the pandemic, and then came the allegations, which took him out of the booking and off TV altogether. He was, suspended because of the investigation. But, Doug, they never really said whether or not this a mutual parting of the ways, as they worded it. No real word about the investigation itself, what it turned up, if this is part of that, or if it just was decided by all parties that a fresh start was needed. But obviously, the allegations are serious, as all the speaking out, allegations were. Marty is an incredibly talented performer. So we'll see what happens now. But ROH did make a lot of, more positive news with not letting folks leave, as with Marty, but they must have had a slew of contracts that must have been coming up around the same time. I'm going to guess, Doug, that they probably were, had contracts based on the number of dates that a performer has, because the fact that they announced so many re-signings in this last week makes me think that the coronavirus probably had everyone's contracts expiring at the same time, since they couldn't meet the minimum number of dates throughout the last year. But anyway, this includes Bandito, Sumi Sakai, Mark Haskins, Amy Rose, Tracy Williams. However, one really major holdout that they have yet to come to an agreement on, and so now he is technically a free agent, is the former Ring of Honor World Champion Dalton Castle. And obviously Dalton is quite a character and would fit in extremely well either in an NXT brand or an AEW. So it'd be interesting to see where Dalton Castle ends up.
Wasn't ROH one of the companies that continued to pay during the pandemic? So I'm sure they generated a lot of goodwill and a lot of loyalty with their team there, and all these people re-upping just because they weren't working, but they still got paid through all this.
And they paid them to do things like play Dungeons and Dragons on YouTube together. So I mean,
paid to do that.
We are in the wrong line of work, apparently, but they definitely foster a small us versus them kind of family atmosphere, and I'm sure that loyalty is paying off for them now by the way that they treated their talent during this difficult time for live performing. Speaking of which, Drew McIntyre, of course, had tested positive for COVID-19 this past week, and therefore they've had to do some rebooking of Raw and the show, and that brought Triple H back to his first match in more than a year. And they did the best they could with a scramble, I'm sure. Obviously, Drew was able to address the crowd at Raw, and therefore is asymptomatic, probably not going to jeopardize his Royal Rumble contest here in a couple weeks, considering that the test the testing done the other day, he should be out of the woods since he's not symptomatic by the time that Royal Rumble comes around. But obviously it just goes to show that the best made plan, so WrestleMania and everything else we were talking earlier, I mean, it all just sits at the head of a pin as far as one little thing happening that could throw everything askew. And speaking of things going askew, Bruce Mitchell, if those of you who aren't really aware, Bruce Mitchell is a wrestling journalist who has spent more than 30 years with Pro Wrestling Torch, which is one of the bigger fanzines, rag sheets as they're sometimes deridedly called, and then it moved into the digital era as everything else. But it's one of the older of these wrestling publications. And Bruce was let go after 30 years with Pro Wrestling Torch because of an editorial that he did on Brody Lee that wasn't vetted by ownership first, and so got in hot water with the family naturally. And basically the suggestion was that Brody had COVID-19 and that AEW and the family was trying to cover it up. Obviously, this is a man's personal health information, and this is a family who's grieving the loss of their loved one. And here he is calling for more transparency in something that really is no one's business. So the Torch editor, Wade Keller, apologized to the family, thanked Mitchell for his contributions through the decades, as well as his friendship, because they were apparently close, but the heat there got him let go. No public word that I've known yet, Doug, unless you've heard of anything from Mitchell, but very prominent wrestling journalist in a very just ugly situation.
Yeah, I saw that. And, Cornette's had a lot to say about that on his podcast, and really not a fan of Wade Keller or Bruce Mitchell or the Torch at all. But but really, I mean, it's a man's health information, and the demands that Bruce Mitchell was making and allegations that. It's just very conspiracy theory fueled ridiculousness, and we've got enough of that in the world right now.
Amen. And unfortunately, that kind of negativity is feeding into our wrestling. And like you said, it is personal health information. The family's denied it, so yeah, let them deny it. I mean, it's really no one's business but the families anyway. So it's just tragic all the way around. Obviously, we weren't around and doing shows at the time of Brody's passing, but we posted about it here on our site and things. It's just obviously a very sad end to a very promising career from by what all means is just one of the better men in the world of pro wrestling, particularly when you see a lot of the backstage stuff and how he loved his family, and just it's heartbreaking.
Yes, absolutely.
On to couple of quick, much more light things. But Doug, I was not imagining things when I was talking about Triple Mania back in December, one of the last times we had a regular edition of the show. But Marvel has announced a AAA partnership. Apparently, it's an official partnership. At the time, I thought, are they just infringing on the Marvel trademarks here? But the Marvel X Lucha Libre collection is a new group of wrestlers that don identities inspired by Marvel's heroes and villains. This is the way it's being described in the announcement. The technical wrestlers, the good guys, are El Arachno and I'm going to screw up that name, so I won't even try it, but something Americana, but they're very obviously based on Spider-Man and Captain America. And then the tough wrestlers, as they are described, which would be the bad guys, are El Toro Purpua and El Venom. Obviously, Thanos and Venom are the inspirations for these. So these wrestlers all debuted at Triple Mania, and there are more of this faction that is set to follow. And it's obviously tied into merchandising and toys and all that kind of business. But Doug, there's a Marvel wrestling connection out there. This
two of my favorite worlds just clashing together. I have no complaints about this. From what I was reading, I guess the Captain America type character is the mentor to the Spider-Man type character, and I'm not sure about the hills with the Thanos and Venom, but yeah, the Captain America character is supposedly the mentor to the Spider-Man character, and that's the storyline they're working to begin with anyway. So,
and by bad guys, I think you mean the tough wrestlers.
No, I mean the supervillains, man. Supervillains.
Well, why you didn't go with heels or villains or yeah, they went with tough. But
I just want to see the Thanos guy just do this.
Oh, that would be a hilarious gimmick. Hey, in this era of pandemic wrestling, though, we can try that now, because then you just would post-produce that latter part when the guy would disappear from the ring.
Yes.
And the last bit of news I had, Doug, and it's probably a good way to transition because it's related to Impact, which we're getting ready to talk about here in our main event. But Impact Wrestling has a new announced team. Beginning last night at their Hard to Kill pay-per-view, the announced team now consists of Matt Stryker, who has not been on regular broadcast wrestling television since the days of Lucha Libre and Lucha Underground. And then D'Lo Brown is his color commentator. So they replaced Josh Matthews, who has been with Impact for forever. And but Josh actually got a promotion into senior management, so good for Josh. And then his real life wife, Madison Rain, it was his co-host for the last couple of years as the color commentator. And she announced last night during the pay-per-view that she is in fact retiring from the sport of professional wrestling. And so best wishes to everyone involved. I've always liked Matt Stryker's work, like D'Lo. Interesting to see how they gel as a team, but Madison especially, best wishes to her, because really, if you think outside of the WWE system, when you think of women's wrestling, probably the two names you think of the most historically speaking, would probably be like Gail Kim and Madison Rain, and what they did with the Impact Women's division. Maybe Awesome Kong in there as well. But those three women, for a good portion of time, really made the women's division in Impact Wrestling actually something to watch.
Yep.
So we're ready to move on, Doug.
Main event.
We're on the topic of Impact, so it's a great time to mention Impact Wrestling, AEW. They are now aligned in a partnership. And I want to start the conversation with you, Doug, by asking, were you surprised? Not so much that there would be this type of alliance between promotions, as it's obviously something that AEW has looked rather open to by bringing in NWA talent and the like. Are you surprised, though? Because I would have expected maybe like a Ring of Honor, just because they had a relationship in the past. They worked together on that first pay-per-view, the All-In pay-per-view. I was a little maybe surprised that it was Impact that they had this alliance with.
I think, part of Marty staying with Ring of Honor kind of telegraphs something much larger, especially, when his contract, not only brought him into the booking committee, but brought him in as head booker into ROH. I was like, I could see. I was looking more for like a Ring of Honor, New Japan, AEW, kind of kiss and make up, and then alliance forming there, and then bringing in the NWA. Did not really see this coming, but again, I think this was kind of telegraphed when we had Don Callis on commentary multiple times leading in. So it was right there in front of our face, man. We didn't see it coming.
And if you hear Don Callis talk about it, he and Kenny have been working on this for more than a year. He said that this has been laying the groundwork for everything they have coming for more than a year, and I actually believe them because the way that the way those elite guys work, especially that they're long-term bookers, and I wouldn't be surprised if they thought once we get the show up and running, you got to take care of your home business first. But wouldn't it be cool if eventually we could do something like this? Maybe they didn't think necessarily it would be Impact at the time, but some sort of alliance. To I guess stand up in some ways to the big gorilla in the room, which is WWE, of course. It does make a lot of sense. And heck, we don't know that eventually it wouldn't fold in other organizations like New Japan or AAA. I mean, they could really Ring of Honor. They could do a lot with this, and I can't imagine that there wouldn't be too many other promotions willing to hitch their train to the AEW juggernaut right now. I think they get a lot of buy-in if they did try to take this even farther.
And it goes back to the old territory days, where your champion's moving through different territories with other champions, and it has so much potential. But we're getting ahead of ourselves here, talking about everything that could be out there.
True. Probably is good for anyone that might have been living under a rock for the last month or so to talk about where we are at this point. Kenny Omega is your AEW World Champion, and when that happened, when he beat Jon Moxley for the belt, it was a turn from to the hillside with the help of Don Callis, and that's when it was announced that this was all part of a plan with Don and Impact Wrestling and Kenny and AEW. And now, of course, Impact has a couple of Kenny's best friends in the Good Brothers, Gallows and Anderson. So, folks, what we essentially saw this past week on Dynamite is a reunion of the Bullet Club. Well, at least a segment of it. Exactly. That's where I was going to go next. Doug, you want to say a little bit about that? I mean, a lot of fans, the guys that are in that ring doing the Too Sweet are the Bullet Club they think of, but they've been so separate from that organization for so long, it has moved on.
It has moved on, and you still have a lot of the OG Bullet Club. Well, I guess you don't, because Anderson and Gallows were OG Bullet Club, and so was Prince Devitt, Finn Balor. So, but Tama Tonga's had a lot to say on social media about that's not Bullet Club. This is Bullet Club in New Japan.
And exactly in New Japan, and we know how great the Gorillas of Destiny and some of those other guys are. But I would have to think, though, to a mainstream audience, once you saw that, I was marking out. I didn't care if that was like OG somewhere in the middle, the new guy. All I know is these are some of the classic Bullet Club members that we shouldn't be seeing this because they're in different promotions, and here they were together. I thought it was beautiful. I was marking out big time. I'm sure you were.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm an AEW mark. I'm a Bullet Club mark. So absolutely.
And as far as the things they've done right with this, I really think that the biggest thing is Kenny himself. You said you're a mark for the Bullet Club. Me too. But I can very easily see that people who maybe are casual wrestling fans or just American wrestling fans, I can understand if for a lot of the last year and a half they've watched AEW and thought to themselves, Omega's okay, or he's got moments where he's like, wow, he's another good wrestler in a sea of good wrestlers. But that thing that makes Kenny so special, I don't think anyone saw that until the last couple of months on a consistent basis in America. Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely, because we didn't get to see the cleaner for the good part of the AEW's existence. We haven't seen the cleaner Kenny Omega. Those 7-star matches he had with Okada. We haven't we haven't seen that guy in a while. But like you said earlier, the elite, and AEW by design are long-term bookers. They're in for a long-term story, and this has definitely been one of those long-term things. They've done everything that's good for the company to push the company forward by kind of removing Kenny from that, putting a face like Jericho and then Moxley in as like these big names that people are going to recognize to get more eyes on the product, and bring people to them where, audiences may not be familiar with the Bucks or, Kenny Omega or any of the rest of the elite. Sure, some of Cody's work, casual fans will say, oh yeah, that's Cody Rhodes. That's our Stardust. Maybe they're going that way with it. What do I want to watch that guy? But AEW's done just a great job of building and just shifting things to where they need to be to put this into place and build from here for probably the next year.
And where they are now is perfect as far as the things they're doing right. At this point, it's almost everything. I mean, Kenny is, to me, as good as he is as a face, he's even much better as a heel. And Callis is playing his role as the irritant, like to perfection, like the guy you just want to punch because he can't back up what he's talking, but his guys can, so he's talking it. I mean, it's just everything about it is, and the in-ring performances that Kenny's been putting on as a singles wrestler, like that's the guy that we all knew was in there that has been waiting. Scott asked a good question, Doug. Do you think that that we're going to bring in more, as with the Bucks? Do you think that anybody else might be going?
I don't think so. I think we're going to see Cody separate himself. Cody's got the Nightmare family. Cody's got this ridiculous thing building with Shaq and all that. So, Cody's got one angle they're building. Paige has to be separate from this in order for him to take that title from Kenny in about a year. So Paige has his own thing going on there. So I think we've seen as much of the Bullet Club as we're going to see, unless Marty does show up, within the next couple of months or so, which I think is probably feasible. And I don't know where Marty lands on that, but I don't see anybody else from the Elite and Bullet Club, joining up with this because Cody.
And further complicate things for Cody is beyond the Shaq thing, which is going to obviously be a one-off. He is, impending father, so I can very much see him, doing a lot of the office kind of business that he's responsible for, or maybe stepping back a little bit from the ring, at least during those first, couple of months with the new child. I think that's reasonable to think he might do something along those lines. Yeah. As good as this has all been, Doug. I do, you got to get a little bit of criticism in, just like fear. So I worry a bit about the line you have to walk when it comes to invasion angles. So every week on Impact, Tony Khan and Tony Schiavone are there talking smack about Impact. And then there's been some on-air comments on Dynamite where not really anyone else, but Tony in particular is slamming Omega when he's on screen, like, oh, yeah, he showed up on Tuesday nights. Well, yeah, that'll give him six viewers now. And I mean, just real deriding of the competition. And, as we saw when WWF or, at the time bought WCW and tried to do an invasion angle, like, if you really want it to work, you can't bury the competition. We all know that just size-wise between the two companies, there's a huge gulf between where AEW is and where Impact is. But you have to bring Impact up to your level to look like a threat. And to me, Omega, whether you look at him as, he's not loyal or, hey, he's invading, he is the heel, whichever show he's on. It's going to be a mistake if they go too far to make the promotion the heel.
That is true. You can't bury your promotion. And just to address this, I think the logical leader of the Dark Order is 99. Anna Jay needs to take over, the Dark Order eventually for, once the dust settles with the passing of Brody Lee. But, I can totally see Hangman hanging with the Dark Order, but I think
which he has been doing.
You're exactly, but I don't see a leader of the Dark Order emerging unless it is Anna Jay. 99 taking that position, but they've still got a long way to go to work themselves out of kind of a comedy comedy team because there are a lot of great workers in the ring there, but they still need a lot of rehab before they can go up against something like the Bullet Club.
So,
Yeah,
some of the caveats, aside about some of the worries that we have about where this is going, it's obviously going well. And where it's going right now is obviously forming the Bullet Club, having the invasion angle. We've had a promotion versus promotion, champion versus champion is where we're ultimately ending up. Last night on the pay-per-view, what we saw was a six-man tag with Omega and the Good Brothers on one side against what ended up being Moose because one of the Alex Shelley of the Motor City Machine Guns couldn't be there, but it was supposed to be Motor City Machine Guns and the world champion of Impact, Rich Swann, familiar to a lot of WWE fans, I'm sure. But he's the Impact World Champion. I figure at some point that's where we're getting is a champion versus champion, Swann versus Omega match, which will be fantastic, obviously. Fantastic with all the talent involved. But Doug, should this partnership last beyond just those individuals that are currently involved in it? There's a lot of possibilities for other matches between these two promotions.
there are indeed a lot of possibilities for other matches. And I'm not sure how this would come together, but there is so much potential there because I remember us seeing a TNA show back in the day here in Huntington. And correct me if I'm wrong, but do we not get to see Motor City Machine Guns and Generation Me at the time? When the Young Bucks were Generation Me.
Did we?
I know we saw Machine Guns. I'm thinking that
we saw Machine Guns. I for some reason I know they had their run in TNA under different names, but I for some reason didn't think I'd seen the Bucks until their Ring of Honor days.
I'm thinking we saw the Bucks either in Florida, or I'm thinking it was here in Charleston. I was trying to go back, or not Charleston, but Huntington, because I was trying to go back through and look at like old photos and archives, and I have one hard drive I can't find that has all those TNA pictures from that night. But that to me, because I mean they put on such great. I mean it was such great feud that those guys had. Now that they're seasoned, now that they're where they are, that's what I would love to see is the Motor City Machine Guns and the Young Bucks go at it again.
What I've done here, Doug, is bullet point out like a bunch of dream matches, and you just named one of mine too. I think we're obviously on the same page. If you want to talk the modern style of tag team wrestling, I mean, new school tag wrestling, that's Young Bucks. And that's really where, they get that from Motor City Machine Guns, who came before them. Seeing those two together or working the Lucha Brothers in there somewhere. I mean, can you imagine the possibilities when you throw in the Motor City Machine Guns against some of these some of these AEW tag teams?
Yeah,
now, if you want to go old school, if you want old school wrestling, it's also right there. You got the North on Impact who are doing their version of FTR.
Exactly. That's another one I was going to talk about, because I think that is another one, North and FTR. Another. I mean, you could just do an AEW Impact pay-per-view with what I'm sure we're going to roll through here tonight.
I would love to see it. Let's book that pay-per-view. So we got a couple of tag matches. Obviously, AEW is known for tag wrestling in a way that WWE isn't, and I honestly think Impact has a underrated tag division. I'd like to see Best Friends versus the Good Brothers.
Well, we're not going to see that for a while, for at least 6 months.
Due to injury, true.
Yeah.
But I mean, booking wise, that's a dream match I'd like to see. Beyond tag teams, Doug, women's wrestling there's so many great matchups. You and I, if there's been one criticism we've had kind of consistently with AEW, it has been that maybe they need some more influx of talent into their women's division. And honestly, Impact provides them. I think, arguably, the women's matches that I have on my list are more impressive to me than some of the men's matches I can come up with.
So I have champ. What's that?
I said, do you have champ versus champ on there?
I do. I have Purrazzo versus Shida. I want to see that.
That would be a main event anywhere. I mean, Sheeta really needs more legit workers that she can work with. We saw when they brought in Thunder Rosa from like TNA, it blew the roof off. Deonna Purrazzo's like 26. I mean, her best years are still ahead of her, and she's already one of the best in the ring. I would love to see that matchup. 100% agree with you.
I would also love to see, Jordan Grace and Nyla Rose. Yes, 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 yes.
We are all on the same page. That's on my list too. I mean, again, you got two female powerhouses. They are a perfect matchup.
Absolutely.
Let me give you another women's match then, Doug. Britt Baker, the Doctor, versus Ty Valkyrie.
Oh yeah. Oh.
The promos alone would be worth it with those two.
Yes.
I mean, two of the best female talkers on the planet. Put them in a match. I have one other women's match. You have any other women's matches?
I don't, because I'm really not as familiar with the Impact. So my dream matches are kind of light. I've got about 5, and we've hit about 4 of them, I think.
Well, because it's so ripe for tag team and female wrestling crossover. So the other women's match I have is Abaddon versus Su Yung. They have very similar gimmicks, very similar dark otherworldly gimmicks.
Scott Collins,
Rosemary and Abaddon. Actually, that's even better because Rosemary is a perpetual over talent in Impact, and hey, she's not really been seen outside of that Impact stage. Give her that platform on Dynamite, she'd run with it, no doubt. That's a good call.
Yeah. Let's see here. Where's the tag team? There's one more. I got to go through my notes here. Hold on, give me a second. Bounced around. We hit FTR in the North already. Okay, so here's something I didn't really realize, that Moxley and Sami Callihan back in the day in the Indies were a tag team.
Yeah.
So go through AEW, or not AEW, but go through NXT. Mox gets caught up. Sami Callihan, I think the biggest thing he did wasn't he some sort of like hacker character for a little while? Yes. I forgot, like Crow or somebody Crow or something like that
on NXT. Yeah, for a minute.
Yeah, and then he goes on, to do great things in Impact. But that story, you've got some built-in like history there, and I think that would just go over great too. We'll see Moxley and Callahan,
and that's on my list as well. We were going to have a lot of we think a lot of, but Sammy's even tweeted out like, "Hey, if this is a thing, then you and I have some unfinished business."
Right.
So he's already, he's already using social media to book himself into this, but. Think not only do they have the history, but you talk about, again, we're trying to match up what would be dream matches. Both these guys can work that hardcore, brutal style, the kind of match you wouldn't see on regular WWE type television. You want to stand out differently. Put Jon Moxley and Sami Callihan in there and let them bleed, let them, go for the nails and the barbed wire. I mean, for those that like that style of wrestling, these are two of the best at it, and you don't see that a whole lot anymore in American wrestling. It would really stand out.
And I don't know who would be the good counterpoint from Impact, but let me throw you this. Let me throw this AEW name out, and maybe you'll have an answer for me.
Because I got a long list. I bet I got somebody matched up against them.
All right, Eddie Kingston and who? Because Eddie is great, so there's got to be somebody who's a great counterpoint for Eddie over on Impact.
I don't have Kingston on my list.
Come on, man.
All right. I will give you I had this person matched up as a good dream opponent for MJF. But for very similar reasons, because of MJF being such a great talker. And I mean, you could obviously Kingston's an amazing talker. Let's do Kingston versus Eddie Edwards.
Oh yeah, Eddie Edwards.
I mean, style-wise, former world champion in both Ring of Honor and in Impact. Dreamer. So let's match Dreamer up. I think that would be good too. You got kind of two old school guys. I mean, Kingston's bounced around for so long. Actually, I think he'd have a really good style with Dreamer, because I mean, Dreamer obviously has way more matches behind him than he does ahead. He still gets in there, mixes it up. Usually with the hardcore style and the gimmicks, Kingston could work that gimmick really well too. I think that's a good call.
Yeah. Or who else you got, man? What other? Talk to me about more Impact people. Turn me on to somebody here.
So Ace Austin is absolutely someone to watch. I'm kind of surprised he's not shown up on AEW or NXT already. He was a good foil there for a while to the Rascals, who I used to think were one of the best tag teams in the world. They just premiered this past week under new names on NXT. But Ace Austin is a great talker and a great worker. Put that man in against Ray Phoenix, and you're going to have a great, quick, and high-flying contest, if I can speak.
Ace Austin. So, okay. How about that? Sounds like somebody, because I was trying to think of who could go up against Pac too. Who you got somebody?
Chris Bay.
Chris Bay. Let me Google Chris Bay.
Chris Bay is another one who is an up and comer. Kind of reminds me of an Isaiah Swerve Scott style guy. He works really well both on the mat and above it. He's a high flyer as well. I think he and Pac would have a tremendous. I mean, they're similarly sized and they wrestle a similar style. I think they'd match up well. Obviously, Pac has a lot more on his resume, but Bay is an up-and-comer. He's one of the hottest stars on the indie scene, and it was really kind of a coup for Impact to pick him up before one of the major players really got to him. Nice. I also have a big man match, Doug. I have somebody. Are you familiar with Willie Mack?
I know the name. I'm vaguely familiar with the Impact work.
He's a big man that can move. Think of like a Keith Lee type guy who doesn't have the physique, but he's a big guy who can move. He and Lance Archer, I think, would be a great hard-hitting big man contest.
Nice.
Do you have anybody for Ricky Starks?
I do not have anybody for absolute Ricky Starks. Who on Impact could go up against absolute Ricky Starks?
You're very familiar with this guy, so you'll know how well this match would go between the two of them. Ricky Starks versus TJP.
Oh, yes.
Similar build, both can work multiple styles. I think they'd have good chemistry together. I don't know that Ricky's still so new in the business. I don't know that they've ever worked each other before. I think that they would do well.
So I think there's really just limitless possibilities. It's almost like a mix and match. It's like, we just got our two toy collections together here. We just dumped all our Legos in the floor, and we're building this monstrous castle or something at this point.
And I hope that they go beyond just, obviously Rich Swann and Omega,
right?
Is big. And that's where this is right now, obviously with some involvement from the Good Brothers on one side. Did Willie Mack go against Cage? Back in the day, yeah, they've wrestled each other previously, but they would be great too. I'll tell you who, though, Scott, I would see as a good match for Brian Cage would be Madman Fulton at Impact, who at one point was, in the NXT system. He was a member of one of the early members of Sanity before they switched out and put Killian Dane in that big man's role. But Madman Fulton, Brian Cage, I think would have a great contest. But yeah, Willie Mack versus Cage, they have a history, and they would be fantastic. You talk about big men though, Doug. I got one more that is just for, if nothing else. Well, actually, I got two more. But on the big man side, let's get the dinosaur against the moose.
I love that.
Yeah. Luchasaurus versus Moose. Both can wrestle a big man style. I think they'd both be funny playing off one another because they both have they can play the goofy role as well, in the behind the scenes vignettes. And it also looks kind of like Moose, by the fact they elevated him to that. But the fact they elevated Moose to that main event last night when there was the injury to Shelley, I think that goes to show, too, that Moose is probably on his way to being like Rich Swann's next challenger for, that top role in Impact.
So does Impact, I mean, if we're building to like a Clash of Champions kind of thing, does Impact have like a Darby Allin type persona? Not necessarily like the face paint and all that, but that crazy little daredevil kind of guy that takes probably more punishment than a tiny little body like that should take in a ring. Is there somebody like that, or is somebody good to go up against Darby Allin that would at least looks good on paper over an Impact side?
Last night on the pay-per-view, we did see the debut on Impact of Matt Cardona.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Huh.
And so, whether it's a one-time off or not, Crazy Steve, actually, that's a great call out, Scott. Man, somebody watches Impact. Somebody knows their Impact.
I should have done this show with you.
Well, honestly, there is a big, yes, they are the number 2 and 3 promotions in the United States, but there's a huge difference between the exposure. This really helps Impact a lot because it's getting more eyes on their product. And I think they've been underrated. There is a lot of talented folks there. They have national clearance. They have good backing for the first time in years. You and I, saw them back in the day, Doug, many times. We saw them at their old studio there in Orlando when they have a Friday afternoon TV slot on, Fox Sports. Eventually ended up on like a fishing channel or something. I mean, it was really about that bad. And now they're on Access, and I think that this added exposure, in addition to wide access and primetime slot that they have, could hopefully take them to another level. I think it definitely helps them more in the long run if done right than it does even AEW.
Mm-hmm.
I do have one more dream match, and it is a legacy dream match.
Oh, what do you got?
They have a history. They were World Tag Team Champions. Let's go Jericho, Rhino.
Oh, okay.
Just for old time's sake.
Well, Jericho really is a tag team slut, isn't he?
He is, totally. And good for you, Scott. A lot of the Lucha Underground, there is so much, that goes to show, just like I feel right now with Impact. You go back and look at the old Impact when they got made fun of for being like WWE Light. Yeah, they were. Okay, they could be. The booking could be bad. But you still, if you tuned in, you might see Samoa Joe versus, Kurt Angle, or AJ Styles, in his early work, and the early Chris Sabins. And like, you look at all that the roster now and you realize, wow, they had an all-stars roster at one time. Lucha Underground does the same thing. You look at where some of those folks ended up. Hager, right. Shamrock.
Absolutely.
Hager, Shamrock. You play the MMA background of Shamrock as a legend in that industry, and what Hager's doing now in mixed martial arts. There are so many possibilities. It would be a shame for it to just end at the top of the card. If they don't at least capitalize on one cross-promotional pay-per-view, they've missed the boat on this one.
And a side note, one Inner Circle tag team now has the same name as my dog.
True. So, Doug, that's. Do you have any other dream matches?
Again, not as familiar with you with the Impact product as you obviously Scott. So I had to do a little bit of homework to catch up, but I think we've covered quite a bit here, man. And again, it's just like dumping all our toys on the ground and just mixing them all up. And you brought some Transformers, I got some GI Joes. Scott's bringing Legos to the party, his Masters of the Universe collection. We're just having a free for all here, man.
Fantasy booking obviously is a fun thing for fans, but the folks behind this, Don Callis and Kenny, they know that too. So I got to know that they know that there's more juice in this, and that they get the wrestling world really excited by what they're doing right now. The ratings have been showing that the fans are excited by this too. So I hope it continues. I hope we get these dream matches. Folks, if you're watching the archive version of this, watching us on YouTube, whatever, and we've missed something, we've missed a talent that we're overlooking, I know we're overlooking a lot, put it in the comments. But for those of you that maybe are just familiar with AEW and not Impact, if you don't get access, because I don't have it with the cable package I subscribe to, you can get the Impact Plus app, and those shows are available in their app for free. There is a paid tier for the pay-per-views and things, but you can watch the weekly broadcast for free.
Can't you also watch the Impact show on their Twitch channel?
You can. So there's multiple ways beyond cable and satellite, as we talked about back in when we did our cord cutting episode. But yeah, catch up on Impact Wrestling. There's a lot of guys and gals there not to be slept on that would make excellent opponents for AEW talent, and I'd love to see that pipeline continue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think you're right, Scott. They do have a Tubi channel as well.
I I don't even know what Tubi is. I feel old and confused now. Damn
It's all
kids,
right.
get off my lawn.
You ready for the finish, bro?
Let's go to the big finish, Kevin. What do we have this week? Let me tell you first that it's been one of those weeks where Doug has not seen a lot of wrestling because Doug has been, wasn't medically cleared to talk about wrestling or work a little bit this week. So that meant all the work in real life that I should have been doing on Monday into Tuesday, I had to do Tuesday through, right now I should probably still be working. And as soon as we finish this up, I'm going to hop back on the work laptop, so I'm ready for tomorrow. So the only wrestling I've actually been able to catch this week is, of course, Dynamite. And this old man fell asleep during Dynamite. So
Dynamite Doug falls asleep during Dynamite. You know that times are tough, folks.
indeed they are.
Well, because I prepared for a show that we didn't end up doing last week, the time frame I'm covering is the first 2 weeks of the year.
Cool.
So
You go.
embarrassment of the week, really weeks. So Monday Night Raw had this week and then last week, the week before last, I guess now, two different things that I had issues with on Monday Night Raw. First, let's go to that first week of 2021. Raw went to a similar cheap finish in 4 matches in a single episode of Raw. Now, I know every now and then you have someone slips on a banana peel kind of finish. You have to have those in wrestling. But when you put so many of them together, roll-ups, distractions, some other fluke quick wins, it really diminishes things. So you had a Lucha House Party got the best of the Hurt Business, which is obviously a fluke by a roll-up. Dana beat Shayna Baszler by happenstance when she found herself laying on top of her in a submission. She's pretty much out of it, but she happened to be on top of her, so that gets counted as a pin. Riddle beat Lashley with a distraction and a roll-up, and then Ric Flair cost his daughter a match when he accidentally tripped her, or at least at the time we were supposed to think that instead of her opponent. And it's like, man, they've gone to this finish 4 times in one episode, which was just obviously 3 times too many. This past week on Raw, I know we've talked a bit about cinematic wrestling and how we have an issue with it. Mm-hmm. They fortunately have gotten away from it in large, but they still do some post-produced things, and I understand it. Now, work with what you have. You don't have a crowd, so you can do some of these, particularly with the Fiend character, you can do some of these, hey, instead of having to figure out how you get a guy under a ring for 4 or 5 hours in front of a live crowd to come out when he's supposed to. Now you go to the tape, right? Well, this past Monday on Raw, Alexa Bliss ended up in the ring and shot a fireball into the face of Randy Orton. However, I don't have a problem with that. Fireballs have been, basic wrestling shenanigans since the days of Gary Hart and the Great Kabuki, doing that fireball. What was funny about it is that part was obviously post-produced. Triple H had a match with Randy Orton. Randy Orton gets busted open the hard way. Shouldn't have, bleeding from the side of his face. Suddenly, Alexa's in the ring, and no cut, no blood.
Oh.
Oops.
Oh.
So maybe not the worst thing in the world. Obviously, those things are going to happen, but it is pretty apparent because he had been bleeding fairly heavily before that. Doug, from the last couple of weeks, do you have a performer of the week?
I'm just going to go with Kenny Omega and Don Callis. I give them the award of awesomeness that I hand out to somebody from AEW. It seems like weekly. So I'll go Omega and Callis because of everything we've been talking about tonight.
I don't think we even need to belabor it, Doug. Kenny Omega was my pick for Performer of the Week. As much as I love Omega and have been a big mark of his for years, I don't know I've ever actually put him in as Performer of the Week. And I'm thinking, man, I could have done it at any spot in time since like middle of October, and it would have fit. And I wanted to give him a overdue shout out for both the character work and the in-ring work, and obviously Callis right along there with him, and now roll in the other members of Bullet Club, be them on the Impact side or the AEW side. The whole thing they're doing right now, kudos to Kenny Omega.
Yeah, this is
Matches of the week?
I'm not qualified to speak on it again this week because day job.
So can I go on a rant then and tell you some things? Because I'm going a little different. Normally, I would give a match of the week being the past week. But as I mentioned, I had prepared for last week's show and really wanted to talk about a couple matches. So I'm going to talk about matches from the last couple of weeks. So real quick, this week, watch Ring of Honor, watch the TV title match between champion Dragon Lee and challenger Ray Orris. Go NXT UK and watch Walter defend his championship against A-Kid. Both brilliant matches. But because I prepared for last week, I really, really want to make sure we talk about the first week of 2021, because I, honest to goodness, think that was maybe the best start to a wrestling year that I can ever remember. During a normal week, I would have, I keep notes as I go along. So, if something I'd already seen, I mark out the match and I put in the new match of the week. So Monday Night Raw, immediately I'm like, Keith Lee and Drew McIntyre brought the house down. That Spanish fly from the top rope that a big man did on another big man, that alone, I'm like, this is going to be match of the week. That was Monday. By the end of the week, there was 6 other matches that I would put in front of that. That's how amazing the week of professional wrestling was. And I don't know, Doug, if it was just everyone wanted off to a good start in 2021 or what, but there was so much free TV that was being presented like pay-per-views. MLW had their Kings of Colosseum event that they called a pay-per-view that was really just in place of their normal YouTube show. That match in a normal week would have been match of the week that you had when Leo Rush won the middleweight championship against Marlon Reed. On a normal week, that would have been my match of the week, but it wasn't a normal week because NXT presented New Year's Evil, which again was just their normal Wednesday night show. There were several matches on that night that could have qualified for a match of the week. That main event, which was a championship match between, actually it was a rematch. Championship match between Finn Balor and Kyle O'Reilly legitimately ended up with both men going to the emergency room because that's how hard they hit each other. On a normal week, that would have been a match of the week. However, if you turn the channel over to Dynamite, you had Kenny Omega taking on Ray Phoenix in what Dave Meltzer called the best match in the history of Dynamite. Gave it 5 stars. That would normally have been my match of the week. However, that first week of January happened to be the week of, as we foreshadowed earlier, Wrestle Kingdom. Think of this. 5-star matches, whatever you think of Meltzer, he's probably the most revered wrestling journalist that we have. He grades on that 5-star system. He gave, obviously, the 5 stars to Kenny and Ray Phoenix on Dynamite, said it was the best match in the history of Dynamite. You have 2 nights of Wrestle Kingdom. In those 2 nights of Wrestle Kingdom, Meltzer gave 6 matches 4 or more stars. Of those 6, 4 he gave 5 stars or more. Because of those 4, he gave above his normal 5-star rating. That's how many match of the year candidates happened in the very first week of the year. There's no way in the world anything should have beat that 5-star match of Omega and Ray Phoenix. But I have to say that some of those Wrestle Kingdom contests were absolutely off the charts. But best match I think I've seen in forever would be that Jay White Kota Ibushi contest from night 2. That's my favorite match of 2021 thus far in a couple of weeks span where you've seen so many matches that would be a year's worth of classic matches. But they had the longest main event in the history of Wrestle Kingdom, 50 minutes of a classic that will be watched and rewatched and re-examined. But there were other contests, Ospreay Okada, Ibushi winning the belt from Naito the night before, that were almost as good, that were also 5 stars. So absolutely one of the greatest weeks of professional wrestling I can remember. I'm sorry, Doug, that you were so busy and missed all of it, because you need to really go back and watch every bit of what, book off 3 or 4 days because it'll take you that long. Wrestle Kingdom is not short. And those are my matches of 2021.
So there's some residue from 2020 that's lingering in our lives, but I think you just wrapped it up nicely and handed us a bow for 2021, that wrestling is off to an excellent start for this year.
And maybe, Doug, they realize that we, the people, like the performers, just needs something. So everyone, men and women, across different promotions, just absolutely thus far working their butts off to keep us all entertained with all the awfulness that's happening around us. So kudos to those men and women that put themselves on the line to entertain us.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, we've been on about an hour. I think we're at that time to wrap it up, brother.
Well, folks, thank you for joining us for this Impact AEW special. Next week, we're previewing the Royal Rumble.
And our previews do exceptionally well. So thank you, everybody who watches our preview shows.
Tune in next week, 8 o'clock. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, everybody. Stay safe. Go watch some wrestling.